The note she left was simple, written in her perfect, looping cursive on the back of a wedding invitation. An invitation that wasn't for our wedding. It had just 2 words, "It's business." Those 2 words were the explanation for the hole in my life, a void that was exactly $782,451.36 wide. My entire retirement, my pension payout, 35 years of sweat and aching muscles, all gone. The police called it a civil matter. They said since we had a joint account, she hadn't technically stolen anything. But she had. She had stolen my future, and I stood there in the empty house we were supposed to grow old in, holding a worthless piece of paper. My name is Alistair Vance. I'm 55 years old, and for more than half my life, my world has been the clang of metal and the roar of the furnace at the Thompson Steel Mill. I'm not a complicated man. I believed in simple things. A hard day's work deserves a fair day's pay, a promise is a promise, and love is the foundation you build a life on. Every extra shift, every holiday I worked, every dollar I squirreled away was for her, for Corinne. For the little house with the porch swing and the quiet evenings we'd spend together after I finally clocked out for the last time. Just 2 days before my world ended, I was on top of it. I had the jeweler on the phone, finalizing the engraving on the inside of a simple, elegant diamond ring. My forever Alistair. I pictured the look on Corinne's face when I finally asked her not if she would marry me, but when. We'd been together for 5 years, living together for 3. Marriage was the next logical step, the final piece of the puzzle. That evening, I made her favorite dinner, pasta primavera, and poured 2 glasses of the good wine we saved for special occasions. I was giddy like a teenager. I sat across from her at our small kitchen table, the candlelight dancing in her eyes. I cleared my throat, my heart thumping in nervous rhythm against my ribs. "So," I began, my voice a little shaky. "I've been thinking, with my retirement just around the corner, maybe it's time we set a date. You know, for the wedding." I smiled, expecting her to blush or tear up. Instead, she just took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes cold and distant. She placed the glass down with a soft click and looked at me, not as a lover but as a stranger. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "I married someone else yesterday." The words didn't register at first. They felt like a line from a movie, too dramatic and absurd for my quiet life. I think I laughed, a short, strangled sound. "That's not funny, Corinne," I managed to say. But she didn't smile. There was no flicker of a joke in her expression. There was nothing. Just a chilling emptiness where the woman I loved used to be. The silence that followed was louder than the steel mill's furnace. It was the sound of my life breaking apart, the sound of my future being erased in a single cruel sentence. My world didn't just crack, it atomized. The next morning she was gone. Her clothes, her pictures, every trace of her had vanished as if she were a ghost. That's when I checked the bank account. The numbers on the screen screamed at me. A long list of transfers, all dated the previous day, draining every last cent. It was then that I found the invitation on the kitchen counter, placed where she knew I'd see it. "Mr. Sterling Thorne and Miss Corinne Maxwell request the honor of your presence." Sterling Thorne. My boss. The young, slick, new money owner of the mill who had taken over from his father last year. The man I reported to every single day. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a public humiliation. I felt a rage so pure and hot it nearly blinded me. I called her, expecting the number to be disconnected, but she answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "What do you want, Alistair?" she asked. I couldn't form words, only a raw, guttural sound of pain. "The money, Corinne, my whole life." I stammered. "It's business," she said, echoing the note. Sterling needed an infusion of capital for an acquisition. My investment secured my position. It was a smart move. My life savings, my blood and sweat, she called it an investment, to secure her position as the new Mrs. Thorne. She thought she had taken everything from me. My future, my dignity, my life's work. She thought she had left me a broken old man with nothing. But what she didn't know is that she left me with the one thing a man with nothing left to lose has in abundance: time. And a thirst for a very specific kind of justice. She thought it was business, and I was about to show her just how costly that business could be. She started a game of chess, and she had no idea she was playing against a man who was willing to burn the whole board to the ground just to topple her king. This isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens when you push a good man too far. It's about how the deepest wounds can forge the strongest weapons. If you've ever been wronged, if you believe that what goes around eventually comes around with interest, then you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because you won't want to miss a single step of this journey. The revenge is just getting started, and the first move will be one nobody, especially Corinne, will ever see coming. I picked up the wedding invitation again, my hands trembling with a rage that was slowly cooling into icy resolve. I was about to throw it away when my thumb brushed against the embossed logo at the bottom. A single, stylized oak tree. I'd seen it before, but I couldn't place it. I stared at it, my mind racing, trying to connect the dots. Then it hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just any oak tree. It was the logo for the Golden Oak Senior Living Facility, the upscale, ridiculously expensive nursing home where my estranged titan of industry father was living out his final days. And suddenly, I knew this wasn't just about my money. This was about his. The drive to Golden Oaks was a journey through a life I never lived. My beat-up Ford truck, smelling faintly of motor oil and coffee, felt like a foreign invader as I left the smokestacks of my world behind and entered the manicured perfection of his. Here, the roads were paved with quiet money, lined with ancient oaks that formed a canopy over pristine lawns. Golden Oaks wasn't a nursing home. It was a five-star resort where the wealthy came to gracefully fade away. It was a place my father had chosen, a final monument to a life spent valuing appearances above all else, and a place I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. My father, Marcus Vance, was not a man who inspired warmth. I remember standing in his cavernous office as a teenager, the air thick with the smell of leather and cigar smoke. He was a titan carved from granite, his voice a low rumble that commanded boardrooms and broke competitors. There are two types of men in this world, Alistair, he told me, not even looking up from his stock ticker. Men who own the mill and men who work in it. You are choosing to be the latter. Do not expect me to understand why. He saw my choice of a simple, honest life as a betrayal, a stain on the Vance legacy. The woman at the front desk was polished and polite, her smile a perfect, impenetrable barrier. "May I help you, sir?" she asked, her eyes flicking over my worn flannel shirt and work-worn hands. "I'm here to see Marcus Vance," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm his son." She typed his name into her computer and her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Vance's designated caregiver has left very strict instructions. He is not to be disturbed by unscheduled visitors." My heart hammered in my chest. "Designated caregiver?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes," she said sweetly. "A Miss Corinne Thorne. The last time I saw my father, it was at my mother's funeral. He stood by her graveside like a statue, dry-eyed and stoic, while I fell apart. Later, at the empty house, he handed me a thick folder. "Her affairs are in order," he stated, as if discussing a corporate merger. I stared at him, my grief turning to rage. "Is that all she was to you? An affair, to be put in order?" He looked at me with a chilling lack of emotion. "Grief is a useless currency, son. It buys you nothing. Remember that." That was the day our relationship didn't just break, it was declared dead and buried. So Corinne had blocked me. Of course she had. She was isolating him, cutting him off from the world while she spun her web. I walked out of the lobby, the automatic doors whispering shut behind me, but I didn't get back in my truck. I was no longer the man who followed the rules. That Alistair was gone, his ashes scattered by a two-word goodbye. I circled the building, my eyes scanning for an opening, a weakness in the fortress. I found it near the back, a kitchen delivery entrance, the door propped open by a rubber wedge as a couple of workers unloaded a catering van, laughing and complaining about their shift. My father and I only ever connected over one thing, a chessboard. He taught me the game when I was 8. He was a ruthless player, but he taught me the art of strategy, of seeing 10 moves ahead. "Everyone watches the powerful pieces, the queen, the rooks," he'd said, moving a pawn forward one precise square. "They get so distracted by the obvious threats they never see the quiet, unassuming piece marching relentlessly across the board. The game is won not with loud attacks, but with silent, inevitable purpose." I slipped through the propped open door, just a quiet, unassuming man in a place he didn't belong. The hallways of the private wing were silent and smelled of antiseptic and expensive air freshener. I found his room at the end of the corridor, Marcus Vance, Suite 3B. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The man in the bed was a ghost. My father, the Titan, was a frail, shrunken figure lost in a sea of white pillows, a thin blanket pulled up to his chin. His eyes, once sharp and piercing, were cloudy and unfocused. He looked in my direction but saw nothing. The Titan wasn't just fading, he was already gone. My rage faltered, replaced by a profound, hollowing sorrow. On his bedside table, next to a half-empty glass of water, was a leather folio. Corinne's, I assumed. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were not medical charts, but legal documents. A newly drafted last will and testament, a durable power of attorney, and stacks of papers detailing the sale and liquidation of Vance Industries' assets. She wasn't just stealing his inheritance. She was dismantling his entire legacy brick by brick, selling it off for parts before he was even gone. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated cruelty, was breathtaking. This was her business. As I stood there, paralyzed by the scale of her treachery, a sudden pressure wrapped around my wrist. I looked down. My father's hand, shockingly strong, was clamped onto my arm. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, were perfectly clear. The fog had lifted and he was looking right at me. He knew who I was. He leaned forward, his voice a dry, urgent whisper so low I could barely hear it. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a question. It was a command. A puzzle. A key. The third rail, he rasped, his breath hot against my ear. The model trains. Your mother's closet. The third rail. And then, just as quickly as it came, the light in his eyes vanished and his grip went slack. He slumped back into his pillows, the vacant stare returning, leaving me standing in the silent, opulent room. I was alone again, but now I had something more than rage. I had a clue. I had my father's last move in a game I was only just beginning to understand. I had a starting point. My escape from Golden Oaks was a blur of adrenaline and fear. I retraced my steps through the sterile, silent corridors, my father's whispered words echoing in my head. The third rail. I expected an alarm to sound at any moment, to see Corinne's smiling, predatory face rounding a corner. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I slipped back out through the kitchen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't breathe easy until my truck was miles away, rattling back toward the familiar grid of my own world. Your mother's closet. The instructions were specific. There was only one place that could be. My childhood home, sitting empty and silent for the last 10 years. The old house stood on a forgotten street, a two-story Victorian relic that had been in my mother's family for generations. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged, but it was still home. My father, in a rare act of sentiment I never understood, had kept the house after my mother died, paying the taxes but never setting foot inside it again. I let myself in with my old key, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. It was a time capsule of my life, every faded photograph on the wall a ghost of a happier time, every piece of sheet-covered furniture a memory waiting to be disturbed. My mother, Eleanor, was the light in that house. Where my father was cold calculation, she was warmth and laughter. I walked up the creaking staircase to her bedroom, the place that had always been her sanctuary. I remembered her sitting at her vanity, brushing her long auburn hair, humming a soft tune. She was the one who bandaged my scraped knees, who encouraged my love of drawing, who told me it was okay to be a gentle soul in a world my father insisted was built for sharks. Opening her walk-in closet door felt like a desecration, a violation of her memory for a purpose she could never have imagined. The closet was filled with her dresses, still covered in plastic from the dry cleaners, a phantom army waiting for a party that would never come. Her scent, a faint trace of lavender and vanilla, still lingered in the enclosed space. On the top shelf, behind a stack of hat boxes, I saw it. A large, worn cardboard box with the words, Alistair's Trains, scrawled on the side in my father's sharp, angular handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled it down, dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the hallway, and carried it into my old bedroom. I sat on the floor and unpacked the contents. The familiar cold, heavy weight of the die-cast metal engine, the smooth wooden finish of the passenger cars, the intricate sections of track. It was a ridiculously expensive German model train set. I laid out a simple oval of track on the dusty floorboards, my large, calloused hands fumbling with the delicate connectors. The third rail. I examined the tracks, but it was a standard two-rail system. There was no third rail. A wave of despair washed over me. Was this a dead end? A final, confusing memory from a dying mind? Was I just a fool chasing ghosts in a dusty house? Then a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. I was 12 and my father was setting up this very train set, not to play but for a lesson. Power, Alistair, he'd said, his finger tapping the transformer. People see the train, the cargo, the obvious motion. They don't see the electricity flowing invisibly through the rails. The real power is the infrastructure, the hidden system that makes everything else possible. The third rail in a subway is what delivers that unseen energy. It's the source. He wasn't talking about the toy. He was talking about a principle. The unseen source of power. My eyes shot to the heaviest piece, the engine. I picked up the black, weighty locomotive, turning it over and over in my hands. It was a solid piece of metal, perfectly crafted. But my father was a man of secrets, of hidden compartments in his life and his business. I ran my thumb along the underside of the engine, feeling for a seam, a latch, anything out of place. And then I found it. A tiny, almost invisible indentation near the rear axle. I pressed it hard, and with a soft click, a small section of the engine's base popped open, revealing a hidden, felt-lined cavity. My father had built his lesson right into the toy itself. Inside the compartment lay two items. The first was a single old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate, with the emblem of a lion's head on its bow. The second was a small piece of folded paper, yellowed with age. I carefully unfolded it. Written on it in my father's precise script was a 16-digit alphanumeric code. It wasn't a will or a deed. It was a key and an access code. It was the next step, the next clue in the scavenger hunt he had laid out for me. Hope, fierce and bright, ignited in my chest for the first time in days. My father hadn't left me defenseless. He had left me a weapon. As I stared at the key in my palm, my mind racing with possibilities, a sound from outside shattered the silence of the house. A car door slamming shut, its modern, solid thud completely alien in this place of quiet decay. My blood ran cold. I crept to the window of my old bedroom, my heart pounding against my ribs, and peered through a crack in the dusty blinds. A sleek, black Mercedes sedan was parked at the curb, its headlights cutting twin beams through the evening gloom. A man was getting out of the driver's side. My stomach dropped. This was no security guard or private investigator. I knew that confident posture, that expensive suit, that arrogant tilt of the head. It was Sterling Thorne. My boss. Corinne's new husband. He stood on the sidewalk looking up at the dark, silent house. He knew I was here. He hadn't sent an errand boy, he had come himself. The game had just escalated, and the enemy was no longer a distant threat on the phone. He was on my doorstep. And I was trapped inside my mother's house with the one secret that could bring his entire world crashing down. My world shrank to the size of that dusty bedroom. Outside, the enemy was on my territory. Inside, my heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. Sterling Thorne, the man who had stolen my life, was walking toward my mother's front door. Panic gave way to a cold, sharp instinct. I quickly slipped the brass key and the folded paper with the code into my pocket. My mind raced. Running was not an option. Hiding was temporary. This was my home, my ground. For the first time since Corinne uttered those life-shattering words, I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a wall. I descended the creaking stairs, my footsteps silent, my body ready for a fight. I didn't have to wait long. The silence was broken by the sharp, metallic sound of a key sliding into the front door's lock. My breath hitched. He had a key. The violation of it, the audacity, sent a fresh wave of white-hot anger through me. The door swung open and Sterling Thorne stepped inside, flicking on the light switch as if he owned the place. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, looking completely out of place in the dusty, forgotten home. He saw me standing at the bottom of the stairs and a slow, arrogant smile spread across his face. "Alistair," he said, his voice smooth as poison. "Working late." He strolled into the living room, his expensive shoes leaving clean prints in the thick layer of dust on the floor. He ran a finger along the sheet-covered sofa, a look of distaste on his face. "Corinne was worried about you," he said, the lie dripping with false concern. "She told me you paid your father a visit today. That was a mistake. Some family matters, especially complex ones like estate planning, are best left to the professionals." He turned to face me, his eyes cold and assessing. "She's very thorough. She has nurses monitoring him around the clock. They said he became quite agitated after you left." His words were meant to intimidate me, but they did the exact opposite. They confirmed everything. My visit had scared them. My father's moment of clarity had thrown a wrench in their perfect plan. I stood my ground, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Why are you here, Sterling?" I asked, my voice low and even. "And how did you get a key to my mother's house?" His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Corinne is your father's power of attorney. She has access to all his properties. She asked me to check on the place. Make sure a desperate man wasn't doing anything foolish." A memory flashed in my mind. Sterling, just weeks after he'd taken over the mill, walking the factory floor. He wasn't looking at the machinery, he was looking at us, the men who had poured decades of our lives into that place. He wasn't seeing people. He was seeing numbers on a spreadsheet, expenses to be managed, assets to be liquidated. I was just another number to him then, and I was just an obstacle to him now. That memory killed any lingering fear I had of him. He wasn't my boss anymore. He was just a thief in a nice suit. A desperate man? I repeated, taking a step toward him. You and your wife steal my entire life savings, my retirement, my future, and you call me desperate? For the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He expected me to cower, to beg, to be the broken man he had left behind. He didn't expect me to stand up straight. He took a step back, feigning a placating gesture. Look, Alistair, I get it. You're hurt. How about this? I'll write you a check. $50,000. For your trouble. A severance package. You sign a simple NDA and you walk away. Disappear. He was trying to buy my silence. He was trying to put a price tag on my life, on my father's legacy. He still saw me as the simple man who worked in his mill, someone who could be bought and dismissed. I had to play the only card I had, the one my father had given me. I had to let him know that I knew something without revealing what it was. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. I don't want your money, Sterling, I said quietly. I saw my father today. We had a nice chat. Talked about old times. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the final, quiet blow. We talked about his model trains. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. The color drained from Sterling's face. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of shock and alarm. It was a detail too specific, too random, too intimate for him to dismiss. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it meant something. He knew my father had armed me. The hunter had just realized the prey might have teeth after all. Sterling stared at me for a long moment, his mind clearly racing. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. He had come here holding all the cards, and I had just revealed a wild one he never knew was in the deck. He straightened his tie, his composure a fragile shell around his sudden panic. Stay away from your father, Alistair, he said, his voice now a low growl. You have no idea what you're getting into. He turned and walked out, not with the arrogant swagger he'd entered with, but with the hurried stride of a man who had just discovered a fire. After the sound of his Mercedes speeding away faded into the night, I stood alone in the silence, my body trembling with the leftover adrenaline. He was scared. I had scared him. I pulled the heavy brass key from my pocket and looked at it under the dim light of the hallway. The lion's head. Suddenly, another memory from my childhood clicked into place. My father taking me to the city, to his bank. The old Merchants Trust building downtown. It had been closed for years, but I remembered the giant, carved stone lions that stood guard on either side of the massive bronze doors. I knew where the key belonged. I finally had a destination. Sleep was impossible. The confrontation with Sterling had rewired my brain, replacing despair with a humming, nervous energy. Before the sun even rose, I was in my garage, the single bare bulb casting long shadows around me. I packed a small duffel bag with a heavy-duty flashlight, a crowbar, and a pair of thick work gloves. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, a quiet factory worker preparing for a heist. But this wasn't about stealing. It was about taking back what was stolen from me and from my father. I was no longer just a victim of a cruel woman. I was the last soldier in a war I was only beginning to understand. The drive downtown took me through the heart of the city's old financial district. Here, stone giants from 100 years ago stood silent, their grand entrances now boarded up, their ornate carvings covered in grime. The Merchants Trust Bank was the most impressive of them all, a temple of commerce with two massive stone lions guarding its sealed bronze doors. They were weathered and cracked, but their regal posture remained, a silent testament to a time when men like my father ruled the world from buildings like this. The place looked impenetrable, forgotten by time, but I knew its heart was still beating. Getting inside a fortress is impossible if you try the front gate. My father taught me that. But every fortress has a weak spot. I made my way to the back alley, a narrow canyon of brick and dumpsters. High above, a small, grimy window in what looked like a second-floor office was broken, one pane of glass missing. Using a rusted fire escape that groaned in protest under my weight, I climbed. My body, hardened by decades of physical labor, didn't fail me. I slipped through the broken window, my feet landing silently on the floor of a deserted office, the smell of stale paper and dust filling my lungs. I was in. The inside of the bank was even grander and sadder than the outside. A vast marble floor lay hidden under a blanket of dust, and sunlight struggled to pierce the grimy, cathedral-like windows, sending down hazy beams of light like spotlights on a forgotten stage. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous silence. I felt a ghostly presence here, the faint whispers of powerful men making deals that shaped the city. I was an intruder in their tomb, but I had a right to be here. My father's secrets were my inheritance, and I had come to claim them. I remembered coming here once as a small boy, holding my father's hand. He was a king in this place, the tellers and managers all nodding at him with a deference I never saw them give anyone else. He led me down to the vault in the basement to retrieve some documents. He placed his hand on the massive, circular steel door. "This is real power, Alistair," he had told me, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Not the money you can spend, but the security you can build. A vault is more than a box. It's a fortress for your legacy. Never forget that." Following that memory, I found the marble staircase leading down into the darkness. Using my flashlight, I descended into the belly of the beast. And there it was. The main vault door, a masterpiece of steel and engineering, stood slightly ajar, just as my father's memory had promised. The bank had been decommissioned, its contents moved or seized, but the vault itself remained. I squeezed through the opening into the vault chamber. The beam of my flashlight played across a breathtaking sight. Floor-to-ceiling walls of thousands of brass-doored safe deposit boxes, a honeycomb of secrets. My heart sank. How could I ever find the right one? I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and smoothed it out. A 16-digit alphanumeric code. It wasn't a box number. It was too long. It had to be a clue. I stared at the numbers and letters, my mind racing. My father was a man of logic, not sentiment. The code wouldn't be a birthday or an anniversary. It would mean something to his legacy. And then I saw it, embedded in the code. V&I 1958. Vance Industries. 1958. The year he founded his company. I scanned the wall of boxes, my light jumping from number to number, and then I found it. Box 1958. My hand trembled as I inserted the lion key into the lock. It was a perfect fit. With a smooth, satisfying click, the lock disengaged. I pulled open the small door and reached inside, my fingers closing around a long, cold, heavy metal box. I carried it over to a nearby guard's table, the lid crusted with decades of dust. I used the edge of my crowbar to pry it open. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't filled with cash or gold bars. It was filled with history. A thick, leather-bound ledger and a bundle of old, official-looking stock certificates tied together with a faded red ribbon. I sat down on a dusty stool and opened the ledger. The first few pages documented the birth of Vance Industries in my father's familiar, sharp handwriting. A list of initial investors, capital contributions, and the original articles of incorporation. I skimmed through it, a chronicle of my father's ambition. It was interesting, but it wasn't the weapon I was looking for. I was about to close it, my hopes starting to fade, when I noticed the ledger was thicker than the page numbers suggested. A set of pages at the very back had been sealed together. With trembling fingers, I carefully separated the sealed pages. They revealed a hidden section, a secret addendum to the company's official history. There, in my father's own writing, was a detailed record of a silent partner, a 50% co-founder who had provided the bulk of the initial capital. A man who was forced out in the second year of business in a ruthless and likely illegal takeover. My eyes scanned down to the name of this forgotten partner, and the air left my lungs in a single, painful gasp. The name was Thorne. Elias Thorne. Sterling Thorne's father. This wasn't a new feud. It was a war that had been sleeping for 50 years. I sat on the dusty stool in the cold, silent vault, the world outside fading away. The name on the page seemed to burn itself into my mind. Elias Thorne. The story laid out in my father's precise, emotionless script was not just a business deal. It was a brutal, calculated act of betrayal. Sterling wasn't just a greedy corporate raider married to a heartless woman. He was a son avenging his father. This whole nightmare, Corinne, the stolen money, the attack on my father's legacy, it wasn't a beginning. It was an end. The final move in a game that started 50 years ago before I was even born. The ledger was a confession written by a man who felt no guilt. My father, Marcus Vance, described how he and Elias, his best friend, had built Vance Industries from nothing. Elias had the vision, the engineering genius. My father had the ambition, the killer instinct. In his own words, Marcus explained how he created a separate shell corporation, manipulated stock values, and used a series of predatory legal maneuvers to dilute Elias's 50% share down to nothing. He financially strangled his best friend. The final entry on the page was chilling. Elias lacked the will to rule. He was a builder, not a king. A kingdom cannot have two kings. A ghost of a memory surfaced, hazy and distant. I was a little boy, maybe 5 years old, playing with blocks on the living room floor. A man was there, a man with a booming laugh who wasn't my father. He lifted me up and flew me around the room like an airplane. He called me Ace. My mother called him Eli. He used to come over for dinner every Sunday. And then one day he just stopped coming. His name was never spoken again. My father had not just stolen a company from Elias Thorne. He had erased him from my life. Everything clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Sterling's hatred for my father, and by extension for me, was the foundation of this entire plot. He had likely spent his whole life watching my father's empire grow, knowing it was built on the ruins of his own family's dream. He didn't just want the money, he wanted to tear down the Vance name brick by brick. And Corinne, she wasn't just a gold digger who got lucky. She was a weapon, carefully chosen and aimed directly at the weak points of the Vance family, my father's failing health and my own trusting heart. I looked at the bundle of old papers that had been in the box with the ledger. I untied the faded red ribbon. They were the original stock certificates issued to Elias Thorne for his stake in the company. My father had kept them. Not as a memento but as a trophy. Like a hunter mounting the head of his kill on the wall. This was it. This was the physical proof of the original sin, the evidence of the crime that had started a 50-year war. This was the weapon my father, in his final desperate moments of clarity, had left for me to find. Clutching the ledger and the certificates, I made my way out of the bank's dusty tomb and back into the harsh light of the present day. The world felt different, sharper, more dangerous. I was no longer just a man who had been wronged. I was the keeper of a secret that could destroy lives, a secret that Sterling Thorne would do anything to keep buried. I had to get somewhere safe, somewhere I could think, somewhere I could read every word my father had written and form a plan. The stakes were no longer just about my retirement, they were about life and death and a legacy soaked in betrayal. A wave of conflict washed over me. For my entire life I had seen my father as a cold, demanding figure. Now I knew he was also a thief. Part of me whispered that Sterling was only taking back what was rightfully his. But I looked at the facts. Sterling and Corinne were using the same ruthless tactics as my father, preying on the weak, targeting an old man in his sickbed, and destroying me as collateral damage. I wasn't fighting to defend my father's crime. I was fighting to stop his sins from being repeated by the next generation. As I slid into the driver's seat of my truck, the old, forgotten flip phone I kept in the glove compartment buzzed. I never used it, but I kept it charged for emergencies. A text message from an unknown number glowed on the tiny screen. It contained only 3 words, "They've moved him." My blood ran cold. It had to be about my father. My visit to Golden Oaks and my confrontation with Sterling had spooked them. They were hiding him, cutting off my access completely while they finalized their takeover. I looked down at the heavy ledger on the passenger seat. My first instinct was to panic, to drive recklessly back to Golden Oaks and demand answers. But my father had taught me strategy. A direct assault was foolish. I needed leverage. I needed an ally. I needed someone who understood the battlefield better than I did. I needed to find a ghost, someone from that long-forgotten past who knew the whole truth of what happened between Marcus Vance and Elias Thorne. An idea sparked. I opened the ledger again to the very first page, to the list of original company officers. President, Marcus Vance. Vice President, Elias Thorne. And there, at the bottom of the page, a third name. The company's first secretary and treasurer, the person who would have handled all the paperwork, who would have witnessed the entire betrayal firsthand. A woman who had quietly resigned just a week after Elias was forced out. Her name was Beatrice Mayhew. I had no idea if she was still alive or where she was. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to find her. The name Beatrice Mayhew was a lifeline in an ocean of uncertainty. But how does a man like me, a man whose expertise lies in molten steel and heavy machinery, find a ghost who vanished half a century ago? The internet was a confusing maze of data brokers and dead ends. I needed something real, something tangible. I needed paper. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, "Everything leaves a trace, Alistair. You just have to know how to read the dust." So I went to the one place she always found answers, the downtown public library, a quiet sanctuary of organized history. Surrounded by the scent of old books and floor wax, I felt like a bull in a china shop. I started with the basics, old city phone books. In the 1959 edition I found her. Beatrice Mayhew, living in a small apartment on the west side. From there, I began to weave a thread through time, hopping from one public record to the next. I spent hours hunched over a microfilm reader, my eyes burning as I scanned decades of property deeds, tax records, and marriage certificates. I learned that she had married a man named Arthur Gable in 1965 and that they had bought a small house in the suburbs. I remembered my mother bringing me here as a child. She would sit for hours, tracing our family tree, her fingers gently brushing over the names of ancestors. She believed that our past was always with us, that every story, no matter how old, was still happening somewhere inside of us. I felt her presence with me now, a calming hand on my shoulder, guiding me through the dusty records. She was helping me unravel the mess my father had made, providing the patience he had never taught me. This fight was for him, but I was waging it with the tools she had given me. The trail was warm for a while, leading me through the 70s and 80s. And then 20 years ago it went cold. Arthur Gable passed away. The house was sold. Beatrice's name vanished from the public record. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. A cold dread crept into my heart. Had I come all this way just to find a ghost? Was I too late? Was she gone, taking the secrets of Vance Industries with her to the grave? I slumped back in the hard wooden chair, the weight of my failure pressing down on me. I was a factory worker, not a detective. I stared at the last document I had found, the deed of sale for her house. I was about to give up when one small detail caught my eye. The buyer wasn't a person, but an LLC with a generic name, Northwood Holdings. The signature on the document belonged to the notary public. I squinted, my heart giving a sudden lurch. I knew that name. Carol Petrov. She worked the front desk at the Millworkers Credit Union, the same place I'd had my savings account for 30 years. It was a long shot, a thread so thin it was almost invisible, but it was the only one I had. Carol was a kind woman with a friendly face who had known me for years. I found her at the credit union during her lunch break. I didn't tell her about Sterling or the stolen money. I simply said I was trying to find an elderly, long-lost relative to settle a family matter. I know this is an odd question, Carol, I said, but do you remember notarizing a home sale about 20 years ago to an LLC called Northwood Holdings? She was legally not allowed to tell me anything about a client's business, but this was a small town, and she saw the desperation in my eyes. She gave me a sympathetic look and a small, knowing smile. I can't discuss a client's business, she said carefully. But I can tell you the coffee up at the diner near Whisper Lake is the best in the state. The drive to Whisper Lake took 2 hours, leaving the smog and noise of the city far behind. The roads narrowed, winding through dense forests of pine and birch. It was a world away from the grit of the steel mill, a place of profound quiet and isolation. This was a place a person would go to disappear. My hope and my anxiety grew with every mile. Was I about to find the key to everything, or was I just chasing a ghost down a lonely country road? The directions Carol had subtly given me led me to a gravel path marked only by a simple, unpainted mailbox. At the end of the path sat a small, simple cabin, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. It was neat and well kept, with firewood stacked neatly on the porch. Someone was home. My truck engine sounded like a roar in the stillness. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front door, the ledger clutched in my hand like a shield. This was it. Every step I had taken since finding that note from Corinne, every painful memory, every spark of rage, had led me to this single weathered wooden door. My past and future were about to collide right here. I knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet air. I waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open. A small, elderly woman stood there. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, but she stood straight as an arrow. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. They looked me up and down, taking in my work boots, my tired face, and the heavy book in my hands. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clear and strong without a trace of frailty. My throat was dry. Words failed me. I decided the simple truth was the only path. I held up the leather-bound ledger so she could see it. "My name is Alistair Vance," I said, my voice hoarse. "My father is Marcus Vance. And I believe you knew a man named Elias Thorne." The woman's expression remained perfectly still, but a universe of knowledge flickered in her piercing eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She looked at me as if she had been expecting someone to knock on her door with that book for a very long time. She unlatched the screen door and opened it wider. "I've been waiting for you for 50 years, Beatrice Mayhew said. Come in." I stepped across the threshold of Beatrice Mayhew's cabin and into another time. The air inside smelled of old books, wood smoke, and brewing tea. The small living room was meticulously organized, with floor-to-ceiling shelves overflowing with books and neat stacks of file boxes. It was the home of a historian, a librarian of secrets. There was a quiet, unshakable order to the room that felt like the exact opposite of the chaos that had consumed my life. She motioned for me to sit at a small wooden table while she poured 2 cups of steaming tea, her movements calm and deliberate. The world outside, with its betrayals and conspiracies, seemed to fade away. "I knew your father, Alistair," she began, her voice as steady as her hands. "I saw the genius in him, but I also saw the cold, empty space where a conscience should have been. And I knew Elias Thorne. He was the heart of that company. A brilliant, trusting man who thought friendship was stronger than greed. When your father forced him out, I knew a crime that terrible would never stay buried. It would leave a debt, and one day a bill would come due. I have been waiting for the collector to arrive ever since." She looked at me over her teacup. "I just never knew it would be you." She confirmed every detail in the ledger, but she colored in the black and white facts with the painful shades of human tragedy. She described how Elias, after being ruined, fell into a deep depression, his genius spirit completely broken. He lost his house, his friends, and his will to live, eventually dying young of what the doctors called a heart attack but what she called a broken heart. She spoke of his wife struggling to raise their young son, Sterling, in poverty, haunted by the shadow of the Vance empire that should have been theirs. It wasn't just a business deal, it was the destruction of a family. "I remember the last time I saw Eli," Beatrice said, her sharp eyes softening with a distant sorrow. "He came to my apartment after Marcus had delivered the final blow. He just sat there, holding the worthless stock certificates, not with anger, but with a profound confusion. 'He was my friend, B,' he kept saying. 'He was my best friend.' Your father, on the other hand, was celebrating. I saw him the next day. He told me, 'Friendship is a luxury a king cannot afford.' Elias was sentimental. Sentiment doesn't build empires. He truly believed it. He saw kindness as a weakness to be exploited. Listening to her, I finally understood Sterling. His life wasn't just shaped by a business loss, it was forged in the fires of his father's humiliation and pain. His relentless, cruel ambition wasn't just about getting rich, it was about reclaiming a stolen legacy and avenging a father he barely knew. He was trying to become the ruthless king his own father couldn't be, using my father's own brutal rulebook against him. His actions were monstrous, but for the first time, I understood the deep, festering wound from which they grew. He was the product of my father's greatest sin. "So you see," Beatrice continued, "when I heard Marcus Vance had been moved to Golden Oaks, and a mysterious, beautiful young woman had suddenly taken control of his affairs, I became suspicious. I still have a few contacts from the old days. I made some calls." She looked at me intently. "The text message you received, Alistair? The one telling you they had moved your father? That came from me. I have a friend at the facility, a nurse who was worried. She told me Corinne and Sterling have moved your father to a private, isolated wing. They're trying to keep him away from you for good." My jaw tightened. "So what do we do? I have the ledger. I have the certificates. Can't we just go to the police? A lawyer?" Beatrice shook her head slowly. "Too slow. Sterling is dismantling Vance Industries as we speak, selling off assets to fund his own expansion. By the time a court case is heard, there will be nothing left but an empty shell. A lawsuit won't work. We need to attack his funding. We need to create a crisis of confidence with the people who are lending him the money to do this. We need to make them see that he is not the legitimate owner of the assets he's borrowing against." She then told me something that changed the entire game. Sterling's big acquisition, the one he used my retirement savings for, was being financed by the very bank my father used to use. The Merchants Trust, now reformed and renamed the Merchants Bank of America. He was over-leveraged, borrowing billions against the value of Vance Industries. If we could prove to the bank's board of directors that his claim to the company was built on a 50-year-old fraud, they would panic. They would freeze his accounts and recall his loans to protect themselves. It would bring his entire empire crashing down overnight. But how do we prove it? I asked, my voice filled with frustration. This ledger is just my father's private diary. They'll say it's meaningless. Beatrice stood up and walked over to a heavy, old-fashioned, fireproof safe in the corner of the room. She spun the dial with a practiced hand and swung the heavy door open. From inside, she removed a thick, yellowed envelope sealed with wax. "Because your father's ledger is only one half of the story," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. She placed the envelope on the table in front of me. "After Marcus betrayed him, a heartbroken Elias Thorne came to me. He dictated a sworn, notarized affidavit detailing every step of the fraud, every lie, every stolen dollar. He didn't have the strength to fight, but he had the foresight to document the crime. She looked at me, her eyes blazing with a fire that had been smoldering for 50 years. This is Elias Thorne's ghost. With this, we don't just have a story, we have a weapon. And the bank's emergency board meeting to approve Sterling's final loan is in 2 days. We are going to crash that party. The next 48 hours were the most intense of my life. Beatrice's quiet cabin became our war room, a sanctuary where the ghosts of the past gave orders to the soldiers of the present. We spread the documents across her large oak dining table. My father's damning ledger, Elias Thorne's original stock certificates, and his sworn affidavit. The paper was old and fragile, but the story it told was a shockwave powerful enough to topple an empire. Beatrice was the general, her mind sharp and strategic, while I was her sole soldier, preparing for the battle of my life. The final countdown had begun. Beatrice coached me relentlessly. She knew I was a steelworker, not a corporate lawyer. My language was simple, my hands were rough, and my only experience with boardrooms was cleaning them after the executives went home. That is your strength, Alistair, she insisted, her sharp eyes meeting mine. Don't try to be them. Don't use their slick, empty words. Tell them the truth. Tell them your story. Let them see the real human cost of what Sterling and Corinne have done. Let them see you. That will be more powerful than any legal argument a team of lawyers could ever make. Our strategy session was interrupted by a frantic, whispered phone call. It was Beatrice's nurse contact from the facility. They won't let me in his room, the nurse said, her voice trembling. Corinne Thorne has brought in a new private doctor and is refusing access to all regular staff. She says he's in a delicate state. Beatrice, I'm scared. They're isolating him completely. I think they're trying to speed things along. A cold dread washed over me. The clock wasn't just ticking on Sterling's business deal, it was ticking on my father's life. We weren't just fighting a financial battle anymore. This was a rescue mission. Later that evening, while Beatrice was making copies of the evidence, I found an old photo album on her shelf. Tucked inside was a black and white picture of two young men in suits, smiling, with their arms slung over each other's shoulders. They were standing in front of a construction site that I recognized as the first Vance Industries building. It was my father, Marcus, and Elias Thorne. They didn't look like a king and a builder. They looked like best friends on top of the world, ready to build a future together. A profound sadness hit me. I wasn't just fighting Sterling's evil, I was fighting to reclaim the memory of that friendship. We worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. We assembled 10 identical folders, one for each member of the bank's board of directors. Each folder contained copies of the most damning evidence: the ledger entry detailing the fraudulent takeover, a copy of Elias Thorne's original stock certificate, and the signed affidavit swearing to the crime. Beatrice wrote a simple, powerful cover letter that connected the 50-year-old sin to Sterling's current predatory actions. Our plan was simple: not to make loud accusations but to present cold, undeniable and terrifying proof of the bank's exposure. As dawn broke, my phone buzzed. It was a number I knew all too well. Corinne. Her voice was like poisoned honey. Alistair, she cooed. I hear you've been a busy little bee. Listen to me carefully. This is your last chance. Sterling is willing to offer you $1 million. Tax-free. All you have to do is give that old woman the book she wants and disappear. Forever. I was silent. Her voice hardened. Don't make me do something we'll all regret. You are playing a game you can't win. It was a final, chilling threat disguised as an offer. The man who would have been tempted, the man who would have been scared, was gone. Beatrice's faith in me and the truth of the story I now carried had forged something new inside me. It was never about the money, Corinne, I said, my voice low and steady. It's about the truth. And everyone is going to hear it. I hung up the phone before she could respond. I had just officially declared war, and in doing so, I had thrown away any chance of a surprise attack. They would be waiting for us now. The mission just got a lot more dangerous. On the final night, I stood on the cabin's porch, looking up at the vast, silent sea of stars. Just a few days ago, my biggest concern was which fishing lure to use on the weekend. Now I was preparing to walk into a den of lions and tear their kingdom down. My old life was gone, burned away by betrayal. I was no longer Alistair Vance, the factory foreman. I was Marcus Vance's son, and I was Elias Thorne's avenger. I felt the weight of both men on my shoulders, one a ghost of ambition, the other a ghost of justice. Beatrice joined me in the pre-dawn chill. She handed me a neatly pressed, simple gray suit. It was my husband's, she said softly. It's time you looked the part. As I held it, she gave me one last piece of advice. When you speak to them, Alistair, start with your story. Tell them about your 35 years at the mill. Tell them about your $782,000. Show them Corinne's note. Make them understand that the man asking them for billions of dollars is the same man who conspired to steal a working man's life savings. Show them that history is repeating itself. The morning of the meeting arrived, gray and heavy with unspoken promise. I put on the suit. It fit perfectly. Looking in the mirror, I saw not just a steelworker but a man with a purpose. I was ready. Beatrice and I grabbed the box containing the 10 folders and walked out to my truck. That's when we saw it. A black sedan was parked at the end of her long gravel driveway, completely blocking our only way out. 2 large men in dark suits got out. They stood in the middle of the road, arms crossed, waiting. Corinne's promise echoed in my head. We were trapped. The meeting was in 3 hours. For a moment, panic seized me. We were trapped, the finish line in sight but unreachable. Then I saw Beatrice's face. It was calm, her expression not one of defeat, but of annoyance, as if she were dealing with a minor inconvenience. She walked back into her cabin without a word and returned with a set of keys I hadn't seen before. Your father wasn't the only one who believed in hidden paths, Alistair, she said with a wry smile. She led me out the back door, through a thicket of pine trees, to a small, dilapidated barn I hadn't even noticed. Inside, under a dusty tarp, sat an old, beat-up Willis Jeep. It's not pretty, she said, but it knows the woods better than any car. The old Jeep roared to life, and we tore off down a hidden logging trail that bypassed the main road entirely. We bounced over ruts and through muddy patches, the box of evidence held securely on my lap. We were a strange sight, an old woman and a man in a borrowed suit, racing through the wilderness on a mission to topple a corporate titan. We emerged back onto a paved road miles past where Sterling's men were waiting, leaving them to guard an empty driveway. They were watching the front door while we were already halfway to the city, the silent, unassuming pawns marching relentlessly across the board. We walked into the towering glass and steel headquarters of the Merchants Bank of America with only minutes to spare. The receptionist tried to stop us, but a well-dressed man, the bank's chairman, had clearly been warned by Beatrice and was waiting for us. He whisked us into the boardroom just as Sterling was finishing his confident, self-assured presentation. He and Corinne were standing at the head of a long mahogany table, smiling at the board members. When we entered, Sterling's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Corinne's face went pale. The ghosts had arrived at the feast. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked to the head of the table and placed a folder in front of each of the 10 board members. My name is Alistair Vance, I began, my voice clear and steady, echoing in the silent room. For 35 years, I worked at the Thompson Steel Mill, which is owned by Vance Industries. 2 weeks ago, that man, Sterling Thorne, and his wife, Corinne, stole my entire life savings. All $782,000 of it. When I asked why, she left me this note. I placed Corinne's 2-word note on the polished table. It's business. The board members stared at the note, then at Sterling. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. I then told them the whole story. I told them about my father and Elias Thorne. I told them about the stolen company, the broken friendship, and the 50-year-old crime that was the true foundation of Vance Industries. As I spoke, the board members opened their folders. I saw their eyes widen as they read the ledger, the affidavit, the stock certificate. They weren't just reading a business document. They were reading a confession, a ghost story with a very real and present danger to their bank. Sterling began to bluster, calling me a liar, a desperate, fired employee. But the proof was there in their hands, undeniable and cold. It was then that Beatrice delivered the final, fatal blow. Gentlemen, she said, her calm voice cutting through Sterling's panicked denials. What you have there is proof that Mr. Thorne has no legal claim to the assets he is using as collateral for his loan. But the real irony is he never needed to commit this fraud. She revealed the final truth, a detail hidden in the legal jargon of the original partnership agreement. Because my father had never officially bought out Elias's shares, only illegally suppressed them, they had remained dormant, passed down to Sterling upon his father's death. For his entire life, she explained, Sterling Thorne has been the legal 50% owner of Vance Industries. He just had to claim it. Instead, in his blind rage for revenge, he chose to become the very thing he hated. He chose to steal what he already owned. The silence that followed was absolute. Sterling Thorne stood there, utterly broken, not by me, but by the weight of his own father's legacy and his own poisoned heart. He had spent his life trying to be a king like my father, when all he ever had to be was a builder like his own. Corinne, seeing the empire crumble, simply picked up her purse and walked out of the room without a single backward glance, abandoning her ruined king as easily as she had abandoned me. It was over. The bank froze his assets, recalled his loans, and his house of cards collapsed in on itself. In the end, I got my father out of the facility. He was weak, but his mind was clear. We sat together, not as a titan and a disappointment, but as a father and a son. I never had to ask him why he kept the ledger. I knew. It was his final confession, and a desperate hope that his son would be a better man than he was. With control of the company, I didn't keep it. I honored the original partnership. I split Vance Industries in two. Half went into a trust for the employees of the mill, the men and women who had built it with their sweat. The other half I used to create a foundation in Elias Thorne's name, dedicated to helping young engineers and visionaries. I didn't become a king. I became a builder. My father's sins created a debt that took 50 years to come due. It was a story of revenge, but also of redemption. It showed that even the deepest wounds can be healed, and that the best way to fight the monsters of the past is to refuse to become one yourself. If you believe that truth is a light that can never truly be extinguished, no matter how deep the darkness, share this story with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because the world is full of ghosts, and every single one of them has a story that deserves to be told.